Now back to the show. This is The Law Show on CL 650.
It's so funny how we don't talk anymore.
Hey, and welcome back to the show. I'm Zach Spencer along with David Halkett from Macquarie LLP and Leah Donaldson from the Family Law Division there. And your offices are where?
Central City, right above SFU, right downtown Surrey, right across from the Surrey Central SkyTrain station.
Say that 5 times fast.
Exactly.
Surrey Central SkyTrain Station. Yes, and you have 2 floors now, right?
We're on the 15th now, and we'll be getting onto the 18th in October, I believe.
Yep, fall.
Are you moving up? Are you moving on
I'm
up
not.
like the
We're
Jeffersons?
No, we're staying downstairs.
All right. So with family law, you have 3 lawyers that practice, and someone makes an appointment. As Leah mentioned, sometimes they might be just wanting to dip their toes and see where they stand. Other times they've made the decision and they just need you to help execute it. What happens in the first meeting typically?
Okay. Well, they've called up, they set up the appointment, they come in and they fill out a client information sheet, which basically just says who they are, who the spouses are, what the assets are, children, etc. Just basic information. Then they come in and they meet with me, and my normal strategy is I'll sit down and I'll just talk to them about our nice view that we have from the our boardrooms and get them comfortable, and then ask them why they're in to see me and what I can do for them. And usually about 15 minutes later, when they finish telling me what their issue is, then I have a pretty good idea what's going on, and then I can ask the questions to get more in detail out of them. Because sometimes the clients, not knowing what is important and what isn't, they talk in more generalities, whereas we have to get more to the detail. And then with the experience I have and Leah's experience now we have a pretty good idea at the end of the 3/4 of the way through the initial consult what the likely result will be at the end of the day.
So what are some of those questions you might ask that the client might not be thinking of?
Sometimes clients don't have a full picture of the assets and liabilities, or I find one that people don't often think about is we might talk about the legal services you require, but then we also need to talk about, okay, well, what does that look like to implement financially? Because, maybe you're buying the spouse out of your home. Do you want to keep your home? Do you want to sell your home? So those kinds of logistics sometimes clients haven't thought of. And so we need to start thinking about what the goal at the end is. And that has a legal aspect, but also, it involves the client thinking about what they want their life to look like. How many come for the initial consult and you never hear from them again?
That's a hard one to say because sometimes a lot of time passes. Maybe 25% will come in. Some are trying to run their own case and they're coming and seeing a number of lawyers and getting advice from different lawyers. But
they're mining, I should say.
Sometimes they do that. And but I'd say probably at least 3/4 of the people that come in to see us will have us do something at some point. It may, as Leah said earlier in the show, could be a year later I've had a phone call, and I've had one, they came in to see me in 2008, came back to see me in 2015. It took them that long to decide they were going to finally separate. So, and we always can tell because our file numbers start with the year they came in. So if it's an 08 file, we know they first came in to see us in 08, and they may come back a while later, but they've kept us in mind to come back, and they've had their advice as to what could happen. Now, the law may change in the meantime, but at least they have a general idea.
The reason I asked that, Leah, is because you mentioned that someone comes in and you give them advice or they ask advice and you say, well, what does that look like? And maybe they hadn't thought of that. And when they start thinking about that, they start realizing, well, maybe this isn't the right time for this. As we talked about, money is a big one. So they might be saying, well, where are you going to live? How do you want to settle the home and those sorts of things? Where are the kids going to be? And when you ask those questions, maybe they realize, this isn't
I don't want to go down that road.
Yeah.
When I first started, I had a gentleman come in to see me who had 4 children and a stay-at-home spouse. And we basically just went through the numbers. I just explained to him what level of child support and spousal support he would be paying on a go-forward basis. And I never heard from him again.
And that's the one that a lot of people don't realize. It's what's called compensatory payment to the spouse, right? That's someone who gave up their career to stay home.
Exactly. And that can, you have to pay spousal support in that situation until the compensation is met, even if the person gets remarried. So you can be paying for a long time. And if it's a long-term marriage, you may be paying spousal support, at least on the guidelines, for 20, 25 years. And so some will realize that it's not necessarily financially in their best interest to separate. Maybe it's better to put the money you'd be spending on that to try and work between the two of you to get so that you're still together, because you obviously loved each other at some point. You got married and had children together.
Have you ever had an arrangement where it's not financially viable for them to, because of this situation, to divorce, so they just draft an agreement as they're going to live separate lives, but maybe technically they're still married?
No, I've never had that situation.
And could you do that? Like, can that be?
You can always do a marriage agreement to some extent to say how they're going to keep their finances going forward. But
from what I understand from you is when you, the technical is if you believe you're out of the marriage, then the marriage is over, right?
Yeah, that's what definition of separation is. You have a physical separation and one party believing that they were not together anymore or not wanting to think the marriage is over, then you're separated. But you could have a separation or a marriage agreement, I guess a better way to put it, while you're still together, although most wouldn't put the money out because there's no benefit or requirement for the other party to sign it. So where's the benefit and the incentive for the person who may not agree with the terms that are being put forward to sign something when they're together? They may do better simply by separating if that's what they want.
Now, speaking of agreements, how many people now are coming to you for the pre-marriage agreement? I guess the layperson, it's a prenup, right? So what does that look like, and how many people are doing that?
A lot. I'd say a lot more. I'm getting a lot more people coming in for that service. And I think it's because they're getting married later. So people have the ability in their 20s, they're amassing assets rather than getting married earlier on in their 20s. They're getting married, say, in their 30s. So they have, assets too that they may want to protect. They may have received gifts or inheritances that they want to just make sure that they've set out what would happen on a separation. So I'm finding that work is going up.
And Leah's correct. I've had a few just in the last few weeks come in for that. It's also important to, when you're moving in, whether it's for a prenup or just a cohab, because now that common law couples can divide the assets, you crystallize and determine what the assets are at the time you get together, so that later for exclusions, as you can always get an exclusion of property for what you brought into the relationship, you have at least a valuation or an agreement that this is going to be mine going forward if we break up. So it's good to put that in what your intentions are on paper.
That whole lack of romance element of it is are people getting used to this now? Or I'm guessing it's easier with second marriages.
I think it's easier with second marriages, absolutely. But it's also, I think, easier when people are older, because that person may have something that they want to protect as well. So I think the old way, it was usually a person that came from family money with a person that didn't have any family money. But now we're seeing, a lot of people have established their own financial position. It's easy for me to say because I don't think there's anything wrong with it. I think it's a great idea, but I understand that a lot of people don't find it the most romantic.
I love you, but by the way,
it's not the easiest conversation to have with the person you want to move in with, but it's something I think that everyone should have.
And I think I would add to that if you can't have that conversation with the person that you want to move in with, then you probably shouldn't move in with them.
Yeah, I wouldn't disagree with that comment either.
Love is blind.
It is.
That's what keeps you busy.
But once you move in, you're going to be paying bills. You're going to be dividing expenses. So you're going to start having those difficult money conversations. You just don't know it yet.
Well, one of the things, and I think this is a great way to sort of magnify the situation, is, and we've talked about this in the past, say you get an inheritance, right? Yep. Say you get $100,000 from a grandparent or what have you, and you don't have that sort of excluded in the in an agreement, and then you move in together, and then your spouse now says, you know what, we need a down payment for a condo. Let's use that $100,000 and we'll get our first condo. So that's, $500,000 condo, say, and then 5 years later they divorce, and then the person that says, well, wait, that was my grandma's money, but once you've put it into a joint asset, it's really hard to pull it out again, right?
The case law is not clear yet. One case says, yes, if you've gifted the other person, if you're married, you've lost it. Others say if it's in joint names, you may still retain it. But it's certainly easier and better and safer if you're going to put it into any joint name, to have an agreement that says we're putting this in joint names because it's necessary to obtain a mortgage or whatever, but this $100,000 in your example will remain mine as excluded property regardless of how it's used down the road.
So that sets it clear.
Exactly.
Now, that's just one example. There's others as well.
Yeah, of
right?
course.
But that's the kind of thing we're talking about.
Yeah, and I think getting that on paper is certainly, it prevents fights down the road.
And are you seeing the valuations of real estate really muddy the waters with a lot of couples now? Because people might have been living together 10 years. Well, that little house they bought for $400,000 is now worth over $1 million, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, absolutely. I think it's increasing some of the litigation because there's more to get at. If someone came in and it had only increased by $50,000, then that's probably not worth a lawsuit. But by $400,000, well, then maybe it is worth it.
Exactly. There's more money to fight over. So the percentage that you're going to pay of what you're going to receive drops down simply because of the cost of the house now.
Now, if you go to court, you're saying sometimes these can be 5 and 6 and 7 days long?
For a trial, yeah. Normally we set a trial for 5 days because there's a lot of other issues and procedural matters that have to get dealt with and such. So it's safer to take a longer estimate than not. Obviously depends on the matters, but usually you wouldn't set a Supreme Court matter for under 3 days anyway, simply because it's only roughly 4 hours of trial time per day.
Well, the reason I'm getting at that is when you multiply the time and the hourly fees for lawyers, then you better have a substantial amount of money to be going after. But will people just go to the nth degree out of spite?
Some people will. I'd say most people don't. Most people, there's such thing as interim applications that we might do to sort out some of the in the meantime issues. So before you get to a trial, and that's pretty costly. So usually by the time that you've worked out the immediate issues, most people are able to sit down and come to some compromise rather than paying legal fees.
And is the money aspect going out to lawyers sober people up?
Oh, well, it can. Like I know I've had many clients in the past say, I would rather pay you than him or her until it actually comes down to it.
Paying, yeah.
And when I tell them, well, you may pay me and you may pay him or her,
right?
Is it really worth it to you? And often, when it gets down to a few weeks before trial, and if there's offers that are made, and I'm sure Leah does the same as I do, we'll say, look, here's what the likely result will be. We up, down, whatever. But here's what it's going to cost you regardless of what the result is. And then if you have to pay what they want versus what you want to pay, plus what you're paying me, it may not be economically viable for you.
Okay, we're going to take a quick break. That's the voice of David Halkett, partner at McQuarrieHunterLLP, and Leah Donaldson is here as well from Macquarie in the Family Law Department. We'll continue our conversation. In the next segment, we'll get into the kids on CL 650.
There's more of the show still ahead. This is The Law Show on CL 650.